PKE is supposed to be the backbone of digital trust. Yet some of the biggest security incidents in the last 2 decades came from getting PKI wrong. DigiNotar showed what happens when a certificate authority itself is compromised. Attackers could mint legitimate certificates and quietly intercept traffic. Heartbleed reminded us that a single bug in a widely used crypto library can expose private keys at internet scale. The Debian OpenSSL issue proved that weak randomness can make keys effectively guessable, even when the algorithms are mathematically sound. In this course, we'll use these failures as guardrails. Each case shows not just how PKI works in theory, but what breaks in practice, and what we must design and operate differently to avoid repeating these disasters. One of the biggest PKI failures doesn't come from broken crypto, but from using the right certificate for the wrong purpose. Every certificate is issued with specific intended uses, like code signing, securing a website, or encrypting email. Those allowed uses are encoded directly into the certificate, and PKI components are supposed to enforce them. When those boundaries are ignored or misconfigured, a harmless-looking certificate can suddenly act like a mini-certificate authority. It can start issuing or impersonating other certificates that were never approved, effectively bypassing your trust model. This is how small configuration mistakes turn into large breaches. A low-risk internal certificate quietly becomes powerful enough to spoof major sites or internal services. As we go deeper into PKI, keep this in mind. It's not enough to have certificates. They must be constrained to exactly what they're meant to do, and nothing more. To see why PKI matters, look at what happens when its trust model fails. In 2011, attackers broke into certificate authorities and were able to issue hundreds of valid-looking, but completely fraudulent, certificates for major online services. Browsers trusted those certificates, so users saw the usual lock icon and had no idea anything was wrong. This enabled large-scale interception and surveillance of traffic, including activity that looks a lot like state-sponsored espionage. Millions of users could be silently impersonated or monitored, even though HTTPS appeared to be working normally. The takeaway: PKE is only as strong as the authorities and processes behind those certificates. When a CA is compromised, trust on the internet doesn't just weaken, it can collapse, and the impact is global. Historically, one of PKI's biggest weaknesses was that certificates could be issued in secret. A compromised or careless certificate authority could create a valid certificate for your domain and hand it to an attacker, and you might never know until it was abused. Certificate transparency changes that by forcing radical openness. Every publicly trusted certificate has to be recorded in append-only public logs. When a CA issues a certificate, it submits a record to these logs and gets back a signed promise that the certificate will appear there. That promise is then bundled with the certificate itself. Browsers and clients now check both. They verify the CA's signature, and they verify that this promise matches what's in the public logs. Security teams and researchers continuously monitor the logs to spot unexpected or suspicious certificates for their domains. The result is a strong deterrent against rogue issuance, and a fast detection mechanism when something still goes wrong. Trust is no longer based only on CAs behaving perfectly, but on an ecosystem that can see, verify, and challenge every public certificate. In PKI, everything ultimately depends on one thing: keeping private keys private. The moment a private key escapes its vault, trust collapses. There are a few common ways this happens. Developers sometimes hard-code keys into source code or config files, which then get pushed to Git, copied to laptops, or sent to vendors. Bugs like the Heartbleed vulnerability showed that keys can also leak straight out of server memory, silently, without any file ever being touched. Backups are another weak spot. If keys are stored unencrypted in old snapshots or tapes, an attacker who finds those can decrypt years of traffic. And not every attacker is outside the building. A malicious insider with access to key material can quietly clone identities or forge certificates. When a high-value key is stolen, especially a CA key, it's game over for that trust domain. Every certificate issued by that key becomes suspect, and you're forced into emergency rotation and incident response. That's why strong key management, hardware protection, and strict operational controls are non-negotiable parts of any serious PKI design. In a strong PKI, private keys are protected in layers, like defenses around a crown jewel. Protection starts with how keys are generated. You want high-quality randomness and an isolated environment, ideally using a hardware random number generator, so that keys are unpredictable and never exposed on insecure systems. Next is storage. Keys should live inside protected hardware, such as an HSM, and never leave in plain form. If a key can be copied to a laptop or a script, assume it eventually will be. Then comes access. Even if keys sit in an HSM, you must tightly control who or what can use them. That means strong authentication, role-based authorization, and logging every single use. For the most sensitive keys, you add dual control so no single person can act alone. Rotation limits damage over time. Keys should be replaced regularly, and wherever possible you use short-lived keys and certificates so that even if something is compromised, the window of exposure is small. Finally, monitoring closes the loop. You continuously watch for unusual key usage, failed access attempts, or unexpected patterns, and you keep detailed audit trails. Those logs are what let you investigate incidents and prove that your PKI is being operated securely. Public key infrastructure only works if certificate authorities strictly follow their own rules. In this real incident, a major CA issued certificates without properly validating who actually owned the domains. Independent researchers noticed suspicious certificates while reviewing public transparency logs. Further auditing showed the CA's internal processes were not being followed, and hundreds of certificates could not be trusted. The consequence was severe. Browsers and operating systems removed trust in that CA, forcing customers to replace huge numbers of certificates under pressure. The core lesson is that PKI failures are often governance failures. If validation procedures, audits, and accountability are weak, the entire trust chain collapses, even when the cryptography itself is perfectly fine. PKI is often explained as a chain of trust, and that metaphor is very literal. Between a trusted root certificate and your end user, every certificate and every control in the path has to hold. If any one of them fails, the entire trust collapses. Several things can break that chain. A certificate authority can be compromised, as we've seen in real breaches. In that case, all certificates issued by that CA may need to be revoked, instantly invalidating huge portions of the ecosystem. Certificates can simply expire if no one is tracking dates, which is a very common cause of outages. Configuration mistakes can leave gaps in the chain, for example, when servers don't send the full intermediate chain and clients can't build a path to a trusted route. And even if everything is configured correctly, using weak algorithms like SHE1 eventually makes the chain insecure as attackers catch up with the cryptography. Operationally, managing PKI isn't just about issuing certificates. It's about continuously monitoring for compromise, tracking expiry, validating configurations, and phasing out weak algorithms before attackers exploit them. In a zero-trust world, that vigilance over every link is what keeps the overall system reliable. Certificate expiration is one of the most underestimated PKI risks, and it rarely fails because of cryptography. It fails because of operations. When a certificate silently expires, browsers and systems do exactly what they're supposed to do. They stop trusting it. For customers, that looks like an outage, not a security feature. Across high-profile incidents, the patterns are familiar. No effective inventory of certificates, no automated monitoring, and too much reliance on manual renewal steps and email reminders. Add poor communication between teams, and suddenly a single forgotten certificate can take down websites, APIs, VPNs, or critical internal services. In a modern enterprise, certificate expiry is a predictable event, so it should never be a surprise. Mature PKI programs treat certificates like any other critical asset. They centralize visibility, automate renewal wherever possible, and make ownership and escalation crystal clear. A huge part of PKI security comes down to how random your random numbers really are. If an attacker can predict the numbers your system uses for keys, nonces, or certificates, they don't need to break the math. They just replay the pattern. That's what happened in several famous incidents. Weak randomness reduced key strength from practically unbreakable to searchable on a laptop. Many generic random number generators are designed for simulations or UI effects, not for security. They can look random, but still be statistically or programmatically predictable. In contrast, cryptographic random number generators are seeded from high-quality entropy sources, like hardware events, and are engineered to resist prediction, even if an attacker sees a lot of their output. For PKI systems, the rule is straightforward. Never use a generic random API for keys or tokens. Use cryptographic-grade generators only, ideally backed by hardware entropy, so that guessing or reconstructing your keys stays computationally infeasible. This incident is a clear example of how fragile cryptographic trust can be. A single line of code removed an important source of randomness. That meant keys were no longer truly unpredictable. For about 2 years, systems kept generating keys that looked fine, but were actually guessable. SSH keys, SSL certificates, GPG keys. All could be brute-forced far more easily than intended. The algorithms themselves were not broken. The problem was the weak entropy feeding them. Once the issue was discovered, the industry had to assume every key generated in that period might be compromised. The only realistic response was mass key regeneration and certificate replacement. For PKI, the lesson is simple and brutal. Key strength depends as much on implementation and randomness as on key length or algorithm choice. Governance, code review, testing, and monitoring around entropy and key generation are not nice-to-have controls. They are what stand between a secure infrastructure and a silent, long-running catastrophe. PKI doesn't live in a static world. The threats it was originally designed to fix are largely under control. We've moved away from undisclosed certificates and retired obviously weak algorithms like SHA-1. Today, a major risk is how slowly many environments can react. If revocation is sluggish, a compromised certificate can still be trusted for hours or days. Legacy systems that can't handle modern protocols or algorithms force you to keep weaker options around. And even something that still looks strong, like 2048-bit RSA, is becoming a bad bet for long-term security horizons. On top of that, a new wave of threats is forming. Quantum computing will eventually break today's widely used public key algorithms. Supply chain compromises mean an attacker can abuse your PKI indirectly by attacking your build pipelines, 35 dates, HSM integration, or automation. And AI is accelerating vulnerability discovery, shrinking the time between a design mistake and a working exploit. For modern PKI strategy, you can't just set and forget. You need fast operational processes, a roadmap away from legacy crypto, and a plan for quantum-safe and supply chain resilient designs. By now, you've seen how PKI can fail. Let's flip that into a modern defense playbook. First, Treat certificates as fast-moving infrastructure, not paperwork. Use automated enrollment and renewal, so nothing quietly expires, and monitor certificate transparency logs, so you can spot unexpected or rogue certificates issued for your domains. Enforce tight constraints like key usage and extended key usage, so each certificate can do only what it's supposed to do. Next, take key management seriously. Private keys should live in hardware security modules or equivalent protected stores, not on random servers. Rotate keys regularly so any compromise has a short shelf life, and generate them with strong, cryptographically secure randomness. Finally, protect the trust chain itself. Continuously audit your CAs and PKI processes, and verify full chains instead of trusting a single certificate in isolation. Combine that with strong algorithms, modern hashes, and sufficiently large key sizes, and you get a PKI that's much harder to attack, and far more aligned with zero trust expectations. In PKI and in security generally, the goal is not perfection. The goal is to be ready when things eventually go wrong. You deliberately plan for failure. You assume keys can be exposed, certificates can be misissued, systems can be misconfigured. When you design with that mindset, you add monitoring, logging, and controls that make those failures visible. The critical question is no longer, can we prevent every incident? It becomes, how quickly will we detect a problem? And how effectively can we contain and fix it? Resilience comes from 3 habits. Expect failures, detect them quickly, and respond in a repeatable, well-practiced way. In the next module, we'll build on this mindset to design PKI architectures that can survive mistakes, attacks, and change in your environment, instead of collapsing under them.